They say empires are built on armies, laws, and monarchs. But the British Empire had something else beneath its polished surface. Something older. Quieter. Hidden. And if you listen closely to its history, you begin to sense it, like a whisper behind the sound of marching boots. A trace of invisible hands shaping decisions no king ever admitted to following. This story begins not in a palace, but in the shadows cast by the palace walls, where secret societies grew like roots beneath an ancient tree, holding the empire together. Or bending it to their will. Most people believe the British Empire expanded through strategy and trade alone, but documents, journals, and forgotten testimonies reveal a different truth. Behind every political shift, every unexpected alliance, every sudden disappearance of a threat, there were groups moving in silence. Some were intellectual circles. Others were networks of influence. A few were far more mysterious. What united them was a simple principle: power grows best when nobody can see where it comes from. One of the earliest hidden circles emerged in Oxford in the 18th century, an elite group of scholars, aristocrats, and statesmen who believed knowledge itself was the highest form of control. They met in restricted rooms lit only by candles, discussing ideas too radical for the public eye, shaping public morality, influencing foreign policy, guiding monarchs through subtle persuasion. Their goal wasn't domination, but direction. A precise push at the right moment. And the empire shifted accordingly, though the country never knew why. But beyond academic halls, other groups worked with far darker intentions. A society known only through fragments, referred to in private letters as the Circle, communicated through coded messages and met in country manners far from London's prying eyes. Their influence touched colonial decisions, trade routes, and even royal marriages. They believed the empire could survive only if guided by those strong enough to ignore morality in favor of stability. Their members were judges, admirals, advisors, and one unnamed figure rumored to have stood beside the monarch during every major crisis of the 19th century. These were not myths. These were networks of real people whose names never reached history books, yet whose fingerprints can still be found on decisions that reshaped the world. And every time something in British politics shifted too smoothly, too quietly, historians now suspect one of these groups had already prepared the ground. As the empire expanded, so did its hidden architects. The public saw the rise of railways, factories, and overseas territories. But in the background, secret meetings decided who would govern, who would be removed, and which nations would fall under British influence next. The empire seemed unstoppable not because of strength alone, but because it had eyes and hands in places the public never imagined. Tomorrow's historians may uncover even more. But tonight, we step deeper into these veiled rooms, where loyalty was tested, secrets were traded, and the empire's fate was shaped not by kings, but by circles without names. As the 19th century unfolded, the British Empire entered its most powerful phase, and its most secretive. By now, several hidden circles had woven themselves into the fabric of imperial politics. They operated like currents beneath a calm sea, unseen, but capable of steering the largest ships. Ministers came and went, monarchs aged and died, but these societies endured, gliding through generations under new names and new faces. Their influence was subtle, but unmistakable to anyone who knew where to look. One such group was tied to the rapidly growing world of finance. These men were not nobles or scholars. They were bankers, investors, industrial magnates, the engines of Britain's rising economy. In private, they met in luxurious parlors after midnight, their discussions guarded by servants who never spoke of what they overheard. They believed the empire's destiny lay not in royal bloodlines, but in economic strength. Through carefully timed loans, manipulated markets, and whispered advice to politicians, they redirected entire nations without ever lifting a sword. This financial network was never formally named, yet historians now refer to it as the invisible ledger. In dispatches from abroad, colonial governors reported sudden changes in funding or political support, shifts that seemed to appear from nowhere, but always benefited the same small group of businessmen. They never identified themselves publicly, but every major railway, every large company, every colonial expansion had at least one member of this circle buried somewhere in the paperwork. Even more enigmatic was a society woven into the British intelligence community. Before MI5 or MI6 existed, Britain relied on a patchwork of informants, diplomats, explorers, and soldiers. Some of them worked together unofficially, forming a clandestine web long before espionage became an institution. Their symbol was said to be an unmarked ring, simple, silver, worn under gloves during diplomatic meetings. They gathered information on threats to the crown, both foreign and domestic, and passed their findings directly to certain high-ranking advisors. Their motto, whispered only among members, was, "What is hidden protects." This intelligence circle operated independently of the monarchy, yet always in its shadow. A rebellion extinguished before it began, a foreign alliance secured at the perfect moment, a scandal erased before it reached the newspapers, these events weren't coincidences. They were the quiet work of people who believed danger should die before it reached the throne. But perhaps the most chilling of all were the societies built around ideology rather than power. Small groups of philosophers, occultists, and visionaries met in candlelit chambers decorated with symbols borrowed from ancient civilizations. They believed the empire was guided not by chance or strategy, but by fate, by cycles of human history that repeated like the movements of stars. Their purpose was not political, but spiritual, to interpret the signs that would decide Britain's rise or fall. They attracted poets, aristocrats, and sometimes even members of the royal household. While many dismissed them as eccentric gatherings, the influence of their beliefs occasionally reached far beyond their meeting rooms. Certain decisions, delays in war efforts, sudden shifts in royal protocol, unexplained cancellations of travel, have been linked, through scattered diaries, to warnings delivered by these mystical societies. And so the empire marched forward, not by the will of a single ruler, but by the combined, conflicting visions of groups whose existence was never meant to be public. Each society believed it alone understood the empire's true direction. Each worked in silence. And each left behind traces, small, fragile, but real, that reveal how deeply Britain's fate was shaped by those who chose to remain unseen. By the dawn of the 20th century, the British Empire appeared unshakable, its borders vast, its influence unquestioned. But behind the polished speeches and royal ceremonies, the hidden societies were no longer working in harmony. Their visions for Britain began to collide. Some pushed for expansion, others urged restraint. Some believed secrecy was the empire's greatest strength, others feared it had become its greatest weakness. And in this fracturing landscape, the most powerful society of all began to emerge, one whose identity remains the most debated among historians. This final circle was neither academic, financial, nor ideological. It was a hybrid, made up of high-ranking military officers, seasoned diplomats, influential statesmen, and a handful of brilliant strategists. They saw the empire not as a nation, but as a living mechanism, one that required constant calibration. Their meetings took place in private clubs with locked windows, the walls lined with maps of the world. Every decision was connected to another, every colony, every fleet, every treaty was a piece in a massive, quietly shifting puzzle. They did not call themselves a society. In fact, they avoided names entirely. Members communicated through discreet gestures, coded letters, and unmarked envelopes delivered by trusted hands. Their influence was felt most strongly during times of crisis, when conflicts erupted overseas, when monarchs faced scandal, when the government stood at the edge of collapse. They stepped in like surgeons working in the dark, controlling the damage without leaving a visible scar. Their strength came from unity. Unlike the smaller circles, this group had no interest in philosophical debates or spiritual symbolism. They cared only for stability, whatever the cost. And when they acted, the results were unmistakable. Newspapers would call it unexpected diplomacy, a fortunate turn of events, or a surprising recovery. But to those few who knew better, it was the quiet work of men who believed the empire should be preserved even against its own leaders' mistakes. Yet secrecy has a lifespan. Documents age, letters resurface, overlooked diaries are discovered. And slowly, over the course of a century, fragments of truth began to emerge. A signature that didn't match. A meeting that shouldn't have occurred. A political shift too convenient to be coincidence. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they painted the outline of a hidden machinery operating beneath Britain's most defining moments. Were these societies unified? No. In fact, they often worked against one another, one pushing the empire forward, another pulling it back. But all of them shared a single belief: the world was too fragile, too unpredictable, to be left to chance. And so they acted from the shadows, convinced that their unseen influence would secure Britain's future. Today, historians still debate how much power these groups truly held. Some argue their influence has been exaggerated, others insist they guided the empire more than any monarch or prime minister ever did. The truth likely lies in between, hidden hands shaping events just enough to tip the balance, but never enough to reveal themselves completely. And perhaps that is why the legacy of these secret societies endures, not because they ruled openly, but because they shaped history silently. Every empire has its hidden architects. Britain simply had more than most. If you'd like more stories about the shadows behind the crown and the mysteries woven into Britain's past, make sure to subscribe to Old Britain Secrets, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice helps this history live on.